The night of my sister's debutante ball still haunts me, not because of its glamour, but because of what it revealed about my parents, and about the world I thought I knew. $210,000, $210,000 spent on a single evening of sparkling dresses, champagne towers, and a guest list that read like a society column. The halls glittered with crystal chandeliers, the scent of roses and perfumed guests, and the laughter of people who didn't know our family at all, but were happy to applaud the performance of wealth and prestige. My sister, radiant in her gown, smiled as if the world belonged to her. And perhaps in my parents' eyes it did. I remember standing in the shadowed corner of the ballroom, cradling my daughter in my arms, while my parents floated past, too busy managing photographers and socialites to notice the life trembling softly against my chest. My little girl, barely 5, had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition. The doctors had warned me that time was critical, that a surgery costing $74,000 could save her life. I had asked my parents for help, quietly, humbly, hoping that family meant more than pageantry. Their refusal still echoes in my ears. "We can't," my mother had said, her voice smooth, rehearsed, as if she were reciting a line from a play. "It's not in the budget. Priorities, you know." My father had nodded gravely, as if deciding who deserved money were an administrative task, devoid of emotion. No hesitation, no empathy, just a casual, almost polite refusal to save a child's life. Yet the same parents spent 3 times that amount on champagne and silk, on a single night to parade their favoritism. The contrast burned through me like acid. I had grown up in the same house, the same rules, the same air. Yet I was invisible whenever it mattered. Every achievement I had worked for, every moment of struggle, seemed irrelevant in the glittering hierarchy of my family. My sister's happiness, her social ascension, was worth more than my daughter's survival. I left the ballroom before the dancing began, stepping into the cold night with my daughter in my arms. The city lights were harsh, exposing the cracks in my carefully held composure. I whispered to her, my voice trembling, "We'll find a way, baby, I promise." But inside, I felt a storm of helplessness, grief, and anger. My heart ached not just for her, but for the betrayal that had shaped my life. I realized then that my parents' love had always been conditional. It was measured in appearances, in applause, in dollars spent on vanity. Everything else, the quiet suffering, the uncelebrated victories, the lives of those who depended on them, was secondary, negligible. And that realization ignited something in me. Not hatred, not despair, not yet, but a cold, burning resolve. I would not beg anymore. I would not plead with those who had shown they valued spectacle over life. I would find another way. My daughter would live, and someday, those who had turned their backs on us would see that true power lies not in glittering halls and social gatherings, but in courage, cunning, and unyielding love. That night, as I held her close beneath the indifferent city lights, I silently swore a promise. A promise that the story of betrayal would not end in silence, that the injustice of a $74,000 refusal against a $210,000 celebration would one day be accounted for. And in that vow, amidst the pain and humiliation, the seed of a quiet, sweet revenge was planted. The weeks after the Debutante ball were a blur of hospital visits, sleepless nights, and quiet fury. My daughter's fragile body seemed to defy her age, but the unfairness of the world made her resilience feel like an act of defiance. Every beep of the heart monitor reminded me not only of her vulnerability, but of the betrayal I had endured. I kept replaying the memory of my parents' refusal in my mind, the calm, almost rehearsed indifference that had cut through me sharper than any knife. I began noticing patterns I had always ignored. My childhood was littered with tiny betrayals, like footprints in the dust. The way my accomplishments were dismissed, the way my sister's whims were indulged, the way my parents' eyes would light up at her triumphs but glance away at mine. I had long excused it as family dynamics, but now it felt like a deliberate hierarchy. They loved her, not me, and they valued spectacle over substance, money over life. It was exhausting to carry both fear and anger at the same time. Fear for my daughter's survival, and anger at the unfairness etched into the very foundation of my family. I spent hours researching treatment options, medical grants, anything that could save her life. I learned to navigate the labyrinth of insurance claims, hospital bureaucracy, and charitable foundations. Each success, every small step forward became a quiet victory, and with each, the anger in me began to take shape, morphing from raw pain into a plan. I thought about revenge, not the kind that burns everything to ash, but the kind that exposes hypocrisy, that shines a light on those who have hidden in shadows. Sweet revenge, I told myself, must be deliberate, intelligent, almost elegant. My parents had built their lives around appearances, and I realized that appearances could be used against them. I also had to survive the whispers and sideways glances of extended family. They assumed I would crumble, that without the backing of my parents, I was powerless. But each comment, each smirk, strengthened my resolve. My daughter's fight became my fight. Her laughter, bright, defiant, unburdened by adult cynicism, reminded me why I could not fail. Every sleepless night, every ounce of grief became fuel for something larger. In the quiet of our small apartment, I began sketching out strategies. Nothing rash, nothing overt. I started documenting every financial decision, every extravagance, every careless word my parents had spoken about my daughter. I reached out to old friends and colleagues who had quietly watched the family from the outside. Connections that had once seemed insignificant were now potential allies. I realized that revenge would not be a spectacle. It would be a quiet unraveling, a careful dismantling of the illusions my parents had worked so hard to maintain. But more than anything, I had to remind myself not to lose sight of why I was doing this. The target was not anger, it was justice, and the ultimate reward would not be humiliation, but life. Life for my daughter, and the satisfaction of finally holding my parents accountable in a way that mattered. Every night I held my daughter close, feeling her small chest rise and fall, listening to the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. And every night I whispered a promise to myself and to her: we will survive, and they will see the cost of their cruelty. In that quiet space, amid sorrow, fear, and anger, I began to feel something I had not felt in years: control. For the first time, I was not at the mercy of their whims. I was preparing not just to save my daughter, but to ensure that the betrayal that had defined my life would finally have consequences. The wounds were hidden, but they were healing. And in the healing, a plan was forming, slow and deliberate, fueled by love, resilience, and the sweetest kind of revenge, the kind that leaves the guilty powerless without ever stooping to cruelty. By the time winter arrived, I had become almost unrecognizable to my parents. Outwardly, I smiled politely at gatherings, nodded at small talk, and attended family events with quiet composure. But beneath that calm exterior, a careful storm was building. The anger that had once threatened to consume me had transformed into focus. I was no longer the powerless child in my parents' shadow. I was a strategist, silently preparing a reckoning that they would never see coming. Every detail of their extravagance fascinated me. I documented every event, every purchase, every whispered conversation about appearances and status. I discovered the fragile threads holding their social empire together. Old debts, tenuous alliances, and a reputation built entirely on perception rather than substance. Where my parents saw wealth and influence as invincible, I saw weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and cracks just waiting to be exposed. I also had to protect my daughter while plotting this delicate maneuver. Her treatments continued, each appointment a reminder of what was truly important. She was my reason for enduring the humiliation, the family scorn, and the loneliness of being underestimated. I learned to juggle hospital schedules, fundraisers, and quiet financial maneuvers, all while ensuring that no one, least of all my parents, could guess the full extent of my plans. There were nights I stayed awake, poring over documents, connecting dots, and building a strategy that was subtle yet powerful. I reached out to discreet allies, lawyers, financial advisors, and even former family friends who had grown disillusioned with my parents' vanity. Every connection was a piece of the puzzle. I wasn't seeking vengeance for the sake of cruelty. I was constructing a network capable of exposing the truth without ever stooping to their level of pettiness. Meanwhile, my daughter became my anchor and my inspiration. Despite her frailty, she exhibited a spirit that defied her small body. She laughed at the simplest things, celebrated tiny victories, and reminded me daily why I had to succeed. Each giggle, each toothy grin reinforced my determination. My plan wasn't just about retribution. It was about ensuring a life for her that my parents had callously refused to provide. I also began to subtly undermine my sister, not with malice, but with exposure. Invitations she bragged about, socialite connections she flaunted, and her carefully curated image of perfection were quietly being documented. Every lie, every exaggeration, and every instance of shallow loyalty was recorded. I didn't have to attack her directly. The truth, when revealed at the right time, would do all the work. My sister's brilliance in the family's eyes had always been a weapon against me, but now I realized that the same weapon could be turned inward, revealing the fragility behind the facade. The key was patience. I could feel the pieces of the family empire shifting beneath the weight of their own vanity. Every public praise, every show of support for the debutante life only strengthened the network I was quietly weaving. One misstep, one truth revealed, would be enough to bring their illusion crashing down. And through it all, I remained invisible. They laughed, they planned. They flaunted their wealth unaware that the quiet woman they ignored was orchestrating their eventual reckoning. I wasn't reckless, I wasn't vengeful in the ordinary sense. I was patient, deliberate, and motivated by something far more potent than anger, justice, and love. By the end of that winter, I had become almost untouchable. Every conversation, every document, every financial discrepancy was catalogued. Every smile and polite nod at family gatherings masked a mind racing with strategy. I had learned that true power doesn't announce itself. It waits, watches, and strikes when the moment is perfect. And when that moment arrived, my parents would see, in a way that couldn't be denied, the cost of their cruelty. Spring arrived with a quiet tension in the air, as if the world itself sensed the turning of the tide. By now, my plans had been carefully laid, each piece in its proper place, like chess pieces on a board. The patience I had cultivated over months, years, really was about to bear fruit. I no longer feared my parents' indifference. Instead, I wielded it against them, knowing that their obsession with appearances made them vulnerable in ways they had never imagined. It began subtly. Invitations to charity, galas, family events, and social functions were manipulated, revealing discrepancies between my parents' projected generosity and the cold truth of their financial choices. I quietly ensured that the stories of their neglect, especially the refusal to fund my daughter's life, saving surgery, were visible to those who mattered without ever appearing vindictive. Whispers of incredulity spread, masked as concern for a family that seemed perfect, but had glaring cracks. Meanwhile, my daughter's health improved steadily. thanks to the network I had painstakingly built. Funds came from unexpected places, old friends, discreet benefactors, and even anonymous donors who had been touched by our story. Each success, each small miracle, was a testament to what love and perseverance could achieve without relying on the hollow support of the people who had turned their backs on us. Watching her smile for the first time in months, I felt a surge of triumph far sweeter than any revenge could be. The next step was the public, yet quiet, unveiling of truth. My sister's debutante connections, her carefully curated image of perfection, were slowly exposed. Invitations she had flaunted, social connections she had paraded, and the shallow alliances that bolstered her social standing were revealed not with malice, but with precision. The world began to notice the cracks, friends who had been used, promises broken, and an image that no longer matched reality. It was as if the glittering house my parents had built was quietly toppling, brick by brick. I never sought to destroy my sister personally. Her downfall, if it could be called that, was a byproduct of her parents' choices, the lavishness, the favoritism, the callousness toward real human needs. In the end, the universe seemed to correct itself. The sister who had once been the golden child now found herself isolated, admired only for the surface she had once perfected. And my parents, the reckoning was inevitable. Their peers, the very people who had applauded every extravagant gesture, began to question the family's priorities. The contrast between $210,000 ball and $74,000 surgery for a sick child was impossible to ignore. Their reputation, carefully maintained for decades, crumbled silently but inexorably. They faced the consequences not through confrontation, not through vengeance, but through truth. A truth they could not deny because the proof was undeniable. The final victory, however, was mine alone. My daughter, laughing and thriving, was alive because I had refused to accept their indifference. The months of planning, the sacrifices, the quiet strategizing, it had all led to this moment. I had not only ensured her survival, but had demonstrated that power, true power, did not reside in wealth or appearances, but in courage, intelligence, and love. I held her close one evening, the sun casting golden light through our apartment window. We did it, I whispered, feeling the warmth of justice and triumph settle deep in my bones. The hollow glamour of the debutante ball, the indifference of my parents, the hierarchy that had once kept me invisible, it no longer mattered. I had turned betrayal into strength, heartbreak into strategy, and love into the ultimate revenge. In that quiet, victorious moment, I realized something profound. Revenge was sweetest not when it humiliated others, but when it preserved what mattered most. And nothing mattered more than my daughter's life, her laughter, and the unshakable knowledge that, at last, justice subtle, elegant, undeniable had been served.